most common tropes of the horror genre, and especially slasher films, is the final girl, the one woman left alive at the end of the movie to do battle with the killer. It's been a long-standing staple of slasher flicks ever since their inception, with the more iconic examples of course including Halloween's Laurie Strode, A Nightmare on Elm Street's Nancy Thompson, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre's Sally Hardesty, and Scream's Sidney Prescott. Not all final girls are created equal, and some are certainly more memorable than others. But there are also those fantastic ones who simply haven't been given the same spotlight as the genre's most venerated ladies. So with that in mind, I'm Ellie for What Culture, here with 10 lesser-known horror movie final girls you need to know. Number 10. Becky. Becky and the Wrath of Becky. Child protagonists are extremely uncommon in horror movies, yet the Becky movies offer up a rarest instance of a final girl who is quite literally a girl. In the first film, Becky is a mere 13 years old when a gang of neo-Nazis led by the terrifying Dominic invade her family's lake house in pursuit of a mysterious key. Unmatched against a group of violent thugs though she might be, Becky goes full Home Alone on her attackers, creating a glut of improvised weapons to steadily dispense with them one by one, eventually killing Dominic by running his head over with a lawnmower. And in sequel, The Wrath of Becky, a 16-year-old Becky is this time assailed by a far-right extremist group led by the quietly vicious Daryl. Once again though, Becky's far more fierce than she at first appears, in turn proving herself to be one of the most righteous, underappreciated final girls of the 2020s, aided by Lulu Wilson's terrifically entertaining, blood-drenched performance. A third Becky film is in the early stages of development, and it honestly can't come soon enough. Number 9. Zoe, Zombievers. Nobody sits down to watch a movie called Zombievers and expects anything close to an interesting take on the final girl, but truly, Zoe is quite the pleasant surprise. This delightful slice of comedy schlock subverts expectations by presenting Zoe as a character who, in the horror tradition, shouldn't last long against the focal swarm of undead beavers. After all, Zoe doesn't make a hugely sympathetic first impression with her loudly obnoxious personality. And beyond that, she's the first of the college girls to remove her clothes in the movie's opening minutes. A horror death sentence if there ever was one. But Zoe actually ends up being the sole survivor, while her more modest-minded pals all perish, and by film's end it's tough not to be won over by her willingness to say or do whatever she wants. She survives the Zombiever invasion without passing the purity tests too often expected of final girls in the genre. Number 8. Beth, Hostel Part 2. Hostel Part 2 is by no means a great or even particularly good movie, but it doesn't get nearly enough credit for a final girl who is so much better than this rather listless sequel deserves. Beth is one of the 3 American art students who gets preyed upon by the elite hunting club during a trip to Slovakia, and demonstrates everything a top-tier final girl needs: intelligence, resourcefulness, and a willingness to get her hands dirty. Like, really dirty. Beth manages to secure her freedom at film's end by cutting Captor Stewart's penis off before joining the elite hunting club and then decapitating Axel, the woman who led her and her friends to their doom in the first place. Beth's no-nonsense, take-no-prisoners approach is precisely what allows her to survive in the end, and unlike the first film's protagonist Paxton, there's no indication that she got killed after the fact. Number 7. Maddie Hush. With Mike Flanagan's tightly wound slasher film Hush recently being pulled off Netflix and not finding a new home as of yet, you couldn't really be blamed for failing to appreciate the brilliance of the movie and its unique final girl. Maddie is a deaf-mute woman who finds herself targeted by a masked killer in her remote house in the woods. And while this setup could make Maddie a mere figure of vulnerability, her will to survive in spite of major natural disadvantages makes her incredibly easy to root for. Of course, Maddie's lack of hearing absolutely puts her on the back foot more than most final girls, yet she's also able to use her heightened sensory perception in other areas to catch the killer unawares, ultimately allowing her to survive the night. Bolstered by Kate Siegel's superb performance in the role, Maddie is at once a final girl who offers too uncommon representation for the deaf community and a simply appealingly scrappy survivor by any measure. Number 6. Justine Christy. The final and, well, only girl of 2014's criminally underrated horror thriller Christy is Justine, a young college student who finds herself targeted by a cult of killers while staying at her nearly empty campus over Thanksgiving break. Justine is alone and grossly outnumbered by her extremely well-equipped and organised assailants, but in classic Final Girl fashion, she finds it within herself to turn the tables on her aggressors. She uses a car to crush one of the cult members to death, drowns another in a swimming pool, beats another to death with a nailed baseball bat, and defeats end boss Violet by burning her alive. That's quite the impressive and varied body count for someone with no combat experience going up against a gang of folk who literally kill for kicks. Justine's transformation into a capable, if traumatized, badass is sold perfectly by Hayley Bennett's outstanding performance in the lead role. More horror fans desperately need to know about this one because it's a doozy alright. Number 5. Mary Beth Dunston, Hatchet. Though Hatchet's protagonist, Mary Beth Dunston, proved herself to be plenty feisty when portrayed by Tamara Feldman in the first film, she well and truly came into her own in the sequels, where she was played by Scream Queen Danielle Harris. From her ridiculous southern accent through to her infectiously outgoing personality, and how fiercely she relishes putting the boots to killer Victor Crowley, Mary Beth ticks all the boxes for a fun and unforgettable final girl. Franchise filmmaker Adam Green is seemingly well aware that Halloween fans were robbed of the opportunity to see Harris play an adult Jamie Lloyd, and so gave us the next best thing here, a kick-ass femme fatale tirelessly committed to killing the monster who murdered her family. Yet, despite the series' 4th film teasing one final clash between Victor and Mary Beth, it sadly still hasn't materialized. Number 4. Barbara, Night of the Living Dead. Easy though it is to sniff at 1990's Night of the Living Dead remake as an act of cinematic sacrilege sight unseen, the Tom Savini-directed, George A. Romero scripted retelling does something very interesting. It gives us a final girl who wasn't one in the original film. In Romero's 1968 version, Barbara is depicted as a relatively traumatized and helpless character throughout, until she's dragged away by the undead horde and presumably killed. In the 1990 remake, though, Barbara is boldly reimagined as a more self-actualized character. Though she begins the film as stereotypically bookish, all large specs and comfy sweater, she soon enough sheds them and progressively morphs into a genuine action hero in her own right. This is cemented in the film's revised ending, where when fellow survivor Ben dies following a shootout with the despicable Harry, Barbara suddenly pulls a gun and shoots Harry dead without hesitation. Though there's no matching Romero's original 68 film, this remake doesn't get the flowers it deserves for giving the female lead such a superior reinvention. Number 3. Angela, Wreck. Wreck is a terrifically tight 78-minute exercise in gut-wrenching suspense, and one which manages to give the found footage subgenre one of its most memorable yet depressingly unsung final girls. Angela is introduced as a reporter for a Spanish TV news show, and to that end, there isn't much about her chirpy demeanour which suggests she'd last long in a viral apocalypse. But once all hell breaks loose when a fast-acting virus spreads throughout the apartment block she's reporting in, Angela proves herself to be a surprisingly steely survivor. And even though the first wreck ends with Angela being dragged off into the night by the virus's patient zero, she returns in the 2nd and 4th movies as a more capable, hardened combatant, not entirely unlike Ellen Ripley from the Alien franchise. Despite facing off against ungodly monstrosities and even being infected with a parasitic worm-like creature in Wreck 2, Angela makes it to the end of the franchise in one piece against insane odds. Number 2. Jen, Revenge. If you haven't seen 2017's mesmerizing rape revenge horror film Revenge, stop what you're doing right now and give it a whirl. If you've got the stomach for such queasy subject matter, of course. What differentiates Revenge from other entries into the genre is the director's ingenious inversion of the male gaze, taking the subgenre's leering salaciousness and flipping it entirely on its head. And this approach simply wouldn't work without Matilda Lutz's sublimely gutsy performance in the role of protagonist Jen, who despite being abused and pursued by 3 men throughout the film, uses her sheer gutsy resolve to come out on top. Jen endures an insane amount of punishment throughout the story, even being pushed off a cliff and getting impaled on a tree branch. And yet she's badass enough to not only perform gnarly self-surgery with the help of some peyote, but kill all 3 men in her midst. Though the film's opening moments seem to introduce Jen as nothing more than vapid eye candy, by the time the end credits roll, one of the most resourceful horror heroines in recent memory has been born. Number 1. Max Cartwright, The Final Girls. And appropriately, we'll end this list with The Final Girls, a deliriously entertaining horror comedy in which a group of high school students end up transported into an 80s slasher film called Camp Bloodbath. Protagonist Max, whose mother Nancy starred in the film, and her pals are caught in a 92-minute time loop as the movie plays out. Masked killer Billy Murphy ends up stalking both his intended victims from the movie itself and his new fourth wall-breaking prey, Max and her friends. It's a riotous romp in which Camp Bloodbath's actual final girl is unexpectedly killed, and so the remaining group decides that the virginal Max must take up the mantle. Max's genre savviness makes her a serious force to be reckoned with, and when she fully embraces her status as final girl at film's end, she's able to decapitate Billy with his own damn machete. In a gonzo twist though, the final scene reveals that Max and her pals are now in the sequel, Camp Bloodbath 2 Cruel Summer, though Max at least seems decidedly more prepared to battle a dual machete-wielding Billy this time round.